It all started in Geneva, Switzerland, the home of the human rights bodies of the United Nations. In 1993, after 10 arduous years, the United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Populations concluded its work on the contents of a future declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples and submitted it to the United Nations Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights for its consideration. The subcommission in turn submitted the draft to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in 1994. The Human Rights Commission formed a working group to further discuss the draft. This open-ended working group, which includes governments, NGOs, and indigenous peoples delegations as members and observers, has been working on the subcommission's draft since 1995, meeting between the annual sessions of the Commission. Between 1995 to 2005, only 2 out of the 64 articles of the draft were agreed upon. In 2005, recalling its recent resolution on the Second International Decade for Indigenous Peoples, the General Assembly of the United Nations urged the United Nations system to adopt the proposed declaration as soon as possible. By the time the 10th session of the working group was held in 2004, many began to feel that a more informal atmosphere than that of the United Nations office in Geneva could perhaps bring state and indigenous positions closer.
The concept of indigenous is not capable of a precise...
The full implications of this amendment, but I would just like to say that
Organizations...
It was therefore decided that an intersessional workshop would be organized in Mexico to be hosted by the government of Mexico with the cooperation of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. The workshop took place from the 26th to the 30th of September 2005 and was held in the city of Patzcuaro in the province of Michoacán, situated at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters. On arrival in Mexico City, the participants were taken by bus to Patzcuaro.
If you need anything, just ask Viviana at the end of the bus. Pueden pedir lo que necesiten a Viviana al final, o a mí. We're really glad. Really glad that you all are here. It was very difficult for us to get all
At Patzcuaro, the participants were put up at the picturesque Hotel Posada de Don Bosco, which lies in the middle of a lush garden. Get wet in the rain? About 90 people, representing states, indigenous peoples and NGOs, along with a number of academics and experts, gathered from all 5 continents of the world to discuss the draft declaration. Off went the suits and ties and national indigenous costumes. Among the participants were Professor Erika Dias, Special Rapporteur of the United Nations and former chairperson of the Working Group on Indigenous Populations, Dr. Rodolfo Stavenhagen, the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms of Indigenous Peoples, and Dr. Augusto Williamson Diaz, who had worked alongside Special Rapporteur Martinez Cobo in the monumental United Nations study on discrimination against indigenous people.
Irineo Rojas Hernández casa a sus lugares de origen con esta buena energía. Esto está a cargo del grupo de médicos indígenas.
With the government of Mexico to contribute to the success of this workshop and remains fully supportive of the efforts of all participants.
Determinó la forma de vida de cómo un grupo minoritario hacerle la vida menos difícil a otro ser humano. La concepción de Dios entre los otomíes es que se encuentra en los seres humanos.
The participants looked at various provisions of the draft from new perspectives, including a spirit of accommodation, but without compromises, and actually agreed to consider new language to help bring state and indigenous positions closer to each other. The opinions of eminent experts, including those of Professor Dias, Dr. Diaz, and Professor Stavenhagen, were very helpful contributions. At the end of the meeting, most participants seemed to feel that the spirit of Patzcuaro might help bring about further agreements towards the adoption of a final draft for a strong declaration on indigenous peoples' rights.
Narrow the gap.
Article 45 in the chair's text does exactly the opposite and begins to remove the important protections that we're trying to establish in the declaration.
In the international community and children's rights. And I think it's really, I mean, if you look at the way those rights have become internationally recognized, I think that's really what we like indigenous people's rights to be.
Cependant, et de manière générale, elle soutiendra toute version susceptible d'être acceptée sur la base d'un plus
Essence is to all community to attach positive value to the distinct relationship. I should like to emphasize that.
And the draft declaration presupposes the relationship that is almost wedded to each other, and that is what the government assistant says, you know, that secession is not possible.
If someone wants to affect a core article
of the whole declaration that affects every other article, as was mentioned. Self-determination is a prerequisite to remember your families, your homelands, that the day we say that you go home.
The participants did much more than just discuss the draft and come closer to agreement. They explored Patzcuaro town and Mexico City and surrounding areas and made friends.
No, I don't want to be. Now you're on camera.
Patzcuaro had several delights for the visitors. Its clothes and handicraft shops, restaurants, cafeterias and bars, musical concerts, and open-air gatherings and celebrations. And the Mexican government too not only feted its guests, but also feasted them lavishly.
Yes, she's an indigenous person herself. She from Alaska. She's actually related to the
están en medio de los pies de un compañero.
According to the pain, as we call it in Spanish, should not be above the waist and never be of the.
Así porque la trementina una vez prendida ya no se.
The highlight of the out-of-town trips was the visit to the archaeological site of Yacatas, where the avid contrary-turned tourists enthusiastically lapped up the beautiful scenery, the museum, and historical ruins, all in the span of a very short day. They learned for the first time that indigenous people used to play hockey in Mexico more than 1,000 years before the modern Olympics, and even joined in an exhibition match with the local people. Some discovered for the first time, and at first hand, how thin the air could be at high altitudes, making one tired and out of breath more easily than at places with low altitude. However, physical exertion didn't seem to matter at all to the visitors, as the spirit of Patzcuaro was there with them.
Este es el segundo álbum de lo más romántico del rock balada.
Despite the lengthy discussions at the meetings, the visitors' energy seemed to be never-ending. The generous and thoughtful hospitality of the Mexican governmental representatives had the visitors wondering whether the Mexican government officials' regular training featured tourist guide courses. In the evening, the musicians kept the volume of music at a level that discouraged serious discussion, and at times left the visitors with little choice but to either talk in sign language or, better still, use body language. They stopped worrying that the English or Spanish or French wasn't perfect and danced the evening away.
Plus, Erica says I'm wearing my shirt inside.
Very nice. Thank you. Would you like one?
Angadas. Then we change there?
We go to Panchitlan.
On their way home, while on transit in Mexico City, many of the visitors enjoyed some of the delights that this huge city had to offer.
Está habitada por los olmecas y calancas que provienen de la parte sur de la península maya.
When it was time to travel back to their homes, many of the participants were dreaming about a future holiday in Mexico after a strong declaration on indigenous peoples' rights was adopted. They were told that willing hosts would not be difficult to find. And they wondered whether it was not time that more and more United Nations meetings were held at venues other than Geneva or New York to facilitate more informal and dynamic dialogues and negotiations. That might well make some of the proposed reforms to the United Nations system more people-oriented, including for the cause of indigenous peoples and others who have been, and still are, deprived of their rights.